The structure was kept with the person, but they changed who the person was. Was that it, or am I remembering it?
Yeah, that happened in the Roman Empire all the time. So there was like a ruler. It happened in Egypt. It happened in the Roman Empire. There was a ruler, and then all of a sudden the ruler would be gone, and then they would replace the face of the ruler with the new emperor, but still use the old artwork. Kind of their way of recycling.
Yeah, did that happen to Justinian and Theodora in Ravenna, or no?
I don't think so, but I couldn't be 100% positive about that without like researching all of the images of Justinian and Theodora in the empire. I mean, it would logically stand to reason that yes, at some point there was some sort of sculpture where they were replaced, but in the mosaics in Ravenna, no. The mosaics in Ravenna have always been of Justinian and Theodora, and you can go there today and still see them. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for exam 2, we're going to cover the Etruscan, the Roman Republic, the early Roman Empire, the High Roman Empire, the late Roman Empire, late antiquity, the first golden age of Byzantine, the second golden age of Byzantine, and Islamic art. It'll be the exact same format, but there's a major change. And that major change has to do with the fact that I split the exam into 2 parts. The first part is multiple choice. It's timed. You get 2 minutes per question. There are 30 questions. That's 60 minutes. And then part 2, which is a completely different test, so don't like forget to take both sets or sections, is short answer questions that verge on essays. There are 8 of them. They're worth 5 points each, and they're timed, so you have 10 minutes per question. Which, if you're writing a whole 10 minutes on each question, you should be fine.
On the, when we click to see our grades, for some reason it says that exam 2A is 60 points, but 2B is 37. I'm not sure why, because I haven't opened it yet, but it says 30.
Thank you. Let me look at that, because it's supposed to be 40. So I must have keyed something in incorrectly. So let me go back and look at that. Thank you for pointing it out. Let me make a note. Okay. So what if you missed the exam? If you missed the exam and you've arranged an extension at least 48 hours in advance, then it's not a problem. I'll just give you your extension and you're fine. But if you don't, I won't take your exam unless you have a university recognized documented excuse. Okay. So every style of art that we talk about, we can break down in terms of certain stylistic features within the work of art. We can compare the characteristics of the work of art to those stylistic features and come up with some hallmarks that are part of that era. So let's kind of go back and unpack each of the eras and look at the hallmarks. So we talked about Etruscan. The Etruscans were the ancient prehistoric Romans. So they were the pre-Romans. They had a common language and a common religious belief system. And because of that common language and common religious belief system, their society was fairly strong. Their afterlife belief system was one in which they believed in cremation, and they believed that their afterlife would look similar to what they had here on Earth. And so they created these tombs. Each set of tombs looked a little bit different, but the tombs were usually underground, and some of them had things in them for the afterlife. They particularly loved fresco painting, and they really loved highly stylized patterning. Mythological creatures were often included in their art, and they have a gender variation in terms of color. So the men tend to be a dark reddish color, and the women tend to be a white color.
What's the name of that? Again, the color, the color separation.
The color separation, we call that gender. We just call it.
But isn't there a word for it? Like we use that word for Trajan's column, I believe, as well, when we were talking about the.
I don't think so. The gender variation is just it's just an indication of or the color variation is just an indication of which gender they are, but I don't think there's a specific word for it.
I think it was vocabulary word that just meant like color defining something, like defining a certain attribute or.
Maybe it's not ringing a bell for me right now. So from that standpoint, I'll tell you, it probably won't be on the test, because if it's not in the front of my knowledge in my brain right now, I probably didn't have it in my brain when I was writing your exam. Okay.
Oh, polychroming.
Polychroming is definitely something that pertains to Etruscan, but polychroming means color on statuary. So you can see polychroming here in the statue, like in her shirt, it was painted a red color. The fabric was all painted. So any statuary that has painting is called polychromed.
Oh, okay. So it's not, polychroming isn't the distinction, the usage of color to distinguish the genders, but just the presence of colors in the sculpture or artwork.
Right. Sculpture. Painting.
Yes. Yeah, you won't use
just
that.
Sculpture.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. Remember that the Etruscans favored cremation, and so that we see lots of cinerary urns. And they like to place their sculpture on the top of the temple. Their sculpture was unique because it was made of terracotta. They created terracotta sculptures in large kilns that were dug into the earth. The sculpture was then secured at the top of the roof line, and it helped to protect the sculpture from being knocked over should it be on the ground. They had trouble with earthquakes in the area, so if the ground shook and the sculpture was on the ground, the sculpture wasn't heavy like a piece of marble, and so it would fall over. And so because it's made of terracotta, they figured out if they secured it at the roof line, it would keep it from falling over and breaking. You can see in the image below that I have right here, the Etruscan love for patterning on the tablecloth. You can see it sort of, this part's a little cut off, but you can see it in the leopards where the spots are highly patterned. They just like patterning a lot. As far as the incinerary urn, remember that the Etruscans also used the wet drapery technique. It just looks a little bit different than the wet drapery technique that we used to see on the ancient Greeks.
Did you call that syncretism as well? Because
you could. You could definitely call that syncretism. Yeah. Okay. So the Roman Republic. Now remember, Rome goes through two major eras. First is the Roman Republic, and then the Roman Empire. So So the Roman Republic, because it is not a strong, thriving empire yet, there's some things that they do in art to get the look of a strong, thriving empire, but they do it a little bit on the cheap. So one of those things is this invention of this stuff called tufa. Tufa is basically ancient cement. It's a slurry of small pebbles, and it's used in a plastering technique that hardens, and then the Romans paint over top of it to get a look that is marble-like. In the Roman Republic, they invent barrel vaulting, groin vaulting, and the hemispherical dome. The social class structure is divided into patricians versus plebeians. The patrician are really the top 10% of society. They're not, they're born into the station that they live in. And the plebeians are the other 90% of society. It doesn't necessarily have to do with wealth. You could be patrician and not really make that much money. You could be plebeian and make a little bit of money, not a ton of money. But money really wasn't so much as the lineage that you came from. And so the patricians have idealized statuary, and they favor veristic heads. And this is an example of verism. It's that over-exaggerated, wrinkly looking face. But if you remember, the veristic head goes on this really nice, idealized looking body. And so you get this really strange sort of looking sculpture because the idealized body doesn't seem to go with the wrinkly face.
So if we were to ask to identify the elements in that case of that sculpture that had verism and the idealized body, you would point out verism and idealism in the same sculpture?
Yeah, definitely.
And in the Etruscans, are there things in the exam or should we also focus on what were the names? Was it Cerveti? The two major ones, Tarquinia and Cerveti, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about where they're from. I really don't think I asked you anything about the difference between the tombs at Cerveteri versus the tombs at Tarquania.
Or the family, or like those 13 separate.
Yeah, they look different because Tarquania was like the smaller group of family. There were like 3 or 4 families, whereas Cerveteri was like 13 or 14. And so they look different, but I don't think I asked you anything about that on the exam, but good memory. Okay, so back to Roman Republic. Don't forget that the plebeians have a very different look to their art in that they have these large hands and large heads, or large heads and large hands, and that the facial features have this sort of bulbous feel to them, and their bodies are kind of squatty. Those large hands, big heads, squatty bodies are things that we typically see on funerary art. The plebeians don't really have the opportunity for art for any other purpose. The plebeian art is typically funerary. It memorializes their freedom because it honors the patrician that allowed them to buy their freedom, as well as the plebeian person that actually passed away. So the plebeian person that actually passed away would have maybe had some indication of what they did in life. Like, for example, the vegetable vendor, he owned a little market store or a little market front, and every day he would go to the market and set up his vegetables and his wheat and sell them. So on his funerary plaque, that's what we see. We see his vegetable vending that he did every day. Whereas patrician art was done to memorialize or to record their patrician status.
Are all plebeian artworks in the period of the Republic funerary?
Yes. During the Republic, all plebeian work is funerary. And all patrician work is either there to record their lineage, or they're being honored by the plebeian in a funerary piece. So there's really two main options for art other than the temple. So the temple is, architecture that exists, but the only two types of art that are being produced during the Republic are funerary art and art that records the line of lineage for the patricians. The art that, there were also sculptures of government. Those sculptures of government are the ones that we see more and more of the verism come up. But keep in mind, the sculpture of the government records the authority of the local figure. They don't have pictures like we do, right? So in order to say, who's the mayor of your town, they have to have a sculpture so that they can be identified. Well, how's come you sit in the patrician senate? Well, because my dad did and my grandfather did. Here's their sculptures. So because of that, that's why we have art from the Roman Republic. They're really not strong enough yet to be producing major works of art that show power.
And during the Empire, would that depiction of power also be seen in the equestrian statues by resembling the condottiere, or?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The empire grows stronger, and so those condottiere statues become more and more important in terms of showing local power. The local power was very strong. Okay, so background information. Remember, I told you the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic isn't the empire yet. Get 2 classes, and we have the discovery of Pompeii. That discovery of Pompeii gives us a lot more information about what Roman life was like. Within the discovery of Pompeii, we also realized that they had fresco painting, first style fresco painting, second style wall painting. So just remember, the first style wall painting is wall painting that doesn't have any story or any kind of figurative design. Second style wall painting has illustration in it.
And we can have second style wall paintings that also have first style wall painting, right? Like it was it the Dionysus one?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you were thinking about like the Villa of the Mysteries with the worship of the Dionysus, at the bottom, you get this nice first style wall painting, which sort of sets the scene for the second style wall painting that goes over top of it. For sure. Okay. So now let's move on to the Roman Empire. So remember, patrician art loses the verism. They quit using those veristic heads on the idealized bodies, and the body goes solely to the idealism. An example would be Augustus de Prima Porta, which you're looking at here. What you have here is the triumphal arch. The empire expands the furthest under Trajan. You really want to know what Trajan did, what Hadrian did, what Vespasian did. Triumphal arches are common and lead to the procession of the Sacred Way. Remember that road that goes underneath the arch is called the Sacred Way. Mark Antony and Cleopatra rule the African areas of the empire, and they try to take over, but they are soon defeated. Social control through art is very important because the empire is so large. They have a difficult time handling security for that much land, and they're constantly being challenged.
What were areas that became part of the empire during Trajan's time? Like,
ask me that again.
What were parts of the empire? Because it says that it was expanded furthest under Trajan. Like, what were parts that were not part of the empire but became part of the empire after Trajan?
Wow, that is a challenging question for me. Good for you.
I'm just wondering because you said we were supposed to know those things for the exam, so just like foreseeing a couple of things.
Yeah, no, that's challenging because my geography is like this. So you're right.
I asked because you mentioned Carthage a lot, so I was wondering if there's like some specific battle or some like conquest of a specific area that we should know.
Not specifically. What I would tell you is good job in critical thinking for one. Number two, Carthage, just remember I hit that in lecture so hard. Carthage is so important. They want control of Carthage. The Ottomans want control of Carthage. The Romans want control of Carthage. The Franks and the Franciscans and all of the Vikings want control of Carthage. And they're constantly trying to defend it. And it's because it is the port that controls to the east and the west.
Was Hannibal was what of Carthage again?
He was the original dictator in Carthage that they overthrew.
Okay.
But he really was difficult for them to overthrow. And
yeah, he was fighting against the Romans then, correct? Okay.
Yeah, and when the expanse of the Roman Empire falls and Constantine makes Christianity legal, Justinian has a very difficult time holding on to Carthage, and he loses it. He still maintains control of Alexandria, but Carthage is where it's at. Well, because Carthage controls the trade routes into Asia. Under Trajan, the empire expands all the way into Germany and a large portion of Asia, a lot of the top of North Africa. And then, of course, all that land in the middle, like a lot of the Middle East, Alexandria and Egypt. But what you'll notice on the map is that all the countries seem to border the seaway that they hold on to tightly. And it is because of trade. They want to be able to trade through the seaways. It's sort of the cornerstone of their empire richness. It's where all their riches come from. Being able to trade with Asia and these different countries. You know, the Romans they're smart people. They figure out things that they can make that are coveted. You know, they have good art. They have when you talk about syncretism, they steal everything that Greece has and makes it their own. So that's syncretism all by itself, right? Like, they just have this like tendency to love everything Greek. So then they become like stronger. They start doing sculpture and marble and things like that. And art becomes this social control because they're building things to say, hey, look at my power. If I weren't in a formal class, I would say that it was a sort of an extension of phallic symbol. It's they kind of do this, hey, my stuff is bigger than your stuff, so I must be better, right? So there you have it. That's the gist of the art of the Roman Empire, which really just does my heart sadness because it just takes so long to explain in class, and there's so much of it.
Yeah, I still wanted to ask a couple things.
Yes, do.
Like you in the review, first in the review sheet, you asked us to know about Augustus Caesar. I was wondering if that's Octavian, right?
Yeah. So remember that. Hold on. I've got a little thing coming to my brain that I want to make sure I communicate correctly. Remember that Caesar is a title. And
is
that
Augustus a title?
I think so. Let me grab my laptop real quick. I usually have it all in my head just fine, but now today it's jumbling.
No, I was looking that earlier. That's why I asked.
All right. Well, one would think my laptop would be right here. I don't know what I did with it. Yeah, Augustus and Caesar are both titles. So just remember that, like, oh, my common example is Julius Caesar. His name was not Julius Caesar. It was Julius something else. And then it was, his last name was replaced with Caesar because he became in that position of power. Same thing with Augustus.
And there's the, because you asked us about, I think, let me find the word specifically, continuous narrative. And I was wondering if, for instance, the Aristarchus, what was the name of it? Aristarchus, the one that I think Octavian gives to
Livia.
Gives to Livia. If like the high relief that we see there, is that an example of continuous narrative or no?
No, the column of Trajan was a continuous narrative.
Oh, okay, because of the Dacular. Okay.
Right. So all of the spiral. So basically, continuous narrative is a story that's being presented in art that sort of circles around something. So it's kind of like this narrative that like if you can think of it as the song that never ends. Remember that when you were a kid? This is the song that never ends. It was started by someone not knowing what they've done, and then it just keeps going on and on and on. That's a continuous narrative. It just keeps going on and on and on. It's like a cat chasing its tail.
And so because of that, the high relief and the arches would also not be continuous narrative because they're just like telling something and that's it.
Right. So in the Areopagus, the reliefs are simply reliefs that refer to one story itself. The story is contained within the relief. Whereas in the column of Trajan, the narrative just keeps going and going.
We're asked to sort of compare the Basilica Olpia with the later Christian churches, and I was wondering if we could do something like that, or just briefly mention it. Just
we can.
I wasn't exactly sure the differences, like punctually, so I wanted to go over that.
Yep, we will do that. Okay, let's finish the styles and then we'll do some comparisons. So remember, the art of late antiquity coincides with the art of early Christianity. If you use them interchangeably on the test, I would be fine with that. But remember that early Christian art has a ton of syncretism. So it's because the new Roman, they use a lot of the Roman traditions to create art that adapts itself to represent the biblical stories. And sometimes I'll have a Christian student get a little offended by this. But the bottom line is they don't have enough history at that point to create art that is distinctly Christian. And so they use the mythological symbols as a way to talk about the new religion. In addition to they're trying to create converts. So if you're trying to get somebody to buy into a new faith, the last thing you're going to do is create some really wonky looking thing, stick it in front of somebody and say, come on and join me. Because it's going to feel foreign and they're not going to want to follow you. So
was that why they went for plebeian, to do like sort of something popular or something that would connect to the masses? Or
well, Christianity comes along as a religion that is for the masses. So what happens is that, in all of the ancient religions, there really is not room for the common man to worship, because everything's based on how much money you can donate to the temple. It's that, remember when we talked on Monday, it was like you have to, we talked about the iconoclasm, because they were taking donations from the people to clothe the cult statue, to feed the cult statue, to bathe the cult statue in the blood of the fattest calf. And so because of that, people who were everyday ordinary common people did not have the money to be able to sacrifice their fattest calf. They didn't have the money to sacrifice their best wine. They couldn't maybe weave their finest silk and give it to the priest or the priestess because they needed it. And so religion becomes something that's practiced by the top 10% of the people, and 90% of the people watch. And they feel like they don't have a gateway to the afterlife because they aren't wealthy enough to do so. And so then all of a sudden this religion comes along, and where this man who was a normal common plebeian, Jesus's father was a carpenter. He was a normal everyday human being. Jesus comes along and all of a sudden he's preaching and people are listening, and word gets out that, hey, guess what? You too, whether you're rich or poor, can have religion. And people are sort of so desperate for it that they cling to it in rapid numbers. You get this, at the very beginning, you get about 300 converts, and by, I think, 5th century, you've got 6 million. There's just so many people that are so hungry for the faith. And so the people that are primarily grabbing onto that faith are the plebeians. They're the people that couldn't have religion before. So now all of a sudden, they're able to have that religion. And so their artwork shows a plebeian style figure. You end up with early Christian artwork always having large heads, big hands, and squatty bodies. And they represent Jesus in that manner.
Okay, that was one of my questions. If Jesus was depicted as a plebeian in is it Tomb of Junius Bassus, or what?
Yes,
what?
this is the sarcophagus of Junius Bassus.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can click on it here. I'll make it a little bigger. Yeah, you can move that. Well, it's not as clear as I want it to be, but you can see that the heads are pretty big. Like, this is Jesus. He's stepping on the pagan god Zeus. His head is fairly large. His hands are fairly large. His body's pretty short. Here in Adam and Eve, you've got these big heads and squatty bodies. And that's going to happen, until we get to the first golden age of Byzantine. Things slowly change for the depiction of Jesus. He becomes a depiction of royalty in heaven in the Byzantine era, but it takes some time. Okay. All right. So let's move on to Byzantine then. So the first golden age of Byzantine is ruled by Justinian. Remember, he's married to Theodora, and Theodora is not your typical empress. She was Justinian's prostitute. He fell in love with her, and he changes the law so that he can marry her. While she's in office, she changes laws for women to have rights to their children. Up until this point, women have very little rights. They're pretty much the property of their husband. And so just the Theodora comes in and says, now wait a minute, she should have rights to her kids. And Justinian enacts those things into law. She also fights for, I don't want to say control, but she's kind of like the person that manipulates Justinian in certain situations.
Did she inflate him on the establishment of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople?
Absolutely. She's got heavy influence. Like at one point they are being threatened in Alexandria, and so Justinian goes and occupies Alexandria, and he's ready to give up. He's just like, you know what, it's just too hard, I'll just sacrifice it. And she really encourages him to stay there, and they win back the territory. She really felt like the more land they could keep, the better off they were. Because of this, he takes on this really big building initiative. The biggest building initiative he takes on is Hagia Sophia. And the thing that's important about that is Hagia Sophia is not an original church. The original church that was there was burnt down because of a riot. So there was a Christian riot there, and the church burnt. And he went in and said, I'm going to build the church back up. And of course, he picks certain locations within the empire, and he does it very strategically. Those locations that he picks are things that are either in important points that he wants to exercise his control, or they're places that have had problem with uprising. And because of the problem with uprising, he needs to show some sense of, I have some control. So because of that, he builds these big, huge churches. And of course, one of them is Hagia Sophia. You should know why Hagia Sophia was unique. You should know what the designers' goals in Hagia Sophia were, which would have been about the light. The first Byzantine art is about light.
So you're going for like the use of tesserae and the sort of the reflections you have once you like put light in front of them.
Exactly. Yeah. Like when you walk into, I've never been to Hagia Sophia, but I have heard. Like when you walk into the church's walls are just gilded with gold tesserae. It's gold from the time you walk in till the time you leave. And the churches look very different during different times of day. But that row of windows here that are created underneath the dome, those windows are really important. They make the dome feel as if it floats on top of a ring of light. And that experience for the viewer is supposed to be very transformative. Okay, so if you think of Byzantine as being the age of light, or maybe the beginning of the age of light, you'll notice that mosaics have a lot of gold in them, but they have a real flat lookingness to the image. Part of that is because you're looking at a picture of the mosaic. The mosaic was never meant to be seen the way we see it now. It was meant to be seen in the candlelight, and with the torchlight, you would have had certain tesserae that come forward and certain tesserae that go towards the back visually. But because we're looking at a textbook, some artist has come in and lit the mosaic so that it all is very clear looking and that you can fully see every detail of it. And because of that, you don't get the dimension. The figures are somewhat flat looking. It's very difficult to map out exactly where the figures stand, and we call that isophalism, which is an important term to remember. Patterning is something that's really loved within the empire, especially in the framing. You get these like jewels that encrust the mosaics. Like these things are pearls and these are rubies and those are sapphires. Justinian's fibula has a ruby in it that's really, really large.
Those are still in the imperial style or no?
It is the imperial style. Yeah. So most of the art that you see of Justinian, or that has Justinian in it, is done in the imperial style. We'll see that imperial style change a little bit in the second golden age of Byzantine, but we really think there was some sort of imperial pattern book that they must have used, because artists would be able to sit down and sort of create what the icon would look like. And then the glass houses would ship enough glass to the site to actually create the mosaic. But yeah, that's an important point. They definitely had a good sense of imperial style. The interior of the church is highly decorated, but the exterior of the church is very plain. They kind of just want to save the experience for inside. Hagia Sophia, I would say, was the most decorative of the exteriors in the first golden age, and that simply has to do with shape. There's lots and lots of circular elements.
You asked us to know sort of why it was called, like sort of the motive. Would that be, would you be going for like the assertiveness in Constantinople or something else? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the motive for building it had to do with his assertion of power in Constantinople. Okay. He's being threatened by the Ottomans there, heavily. He eventually loses the area to the Ottomans. That's why the church is now a mosque, because the Ottomans won.
The Arabic writing there. So we, in the sheet you sent us for the vocabulary of the test, we were asked to know about Bishop, was it Maximianus?
This is Bishop Maximianus.
Yeah, and so do we, because I don't think anything was mentioned about him other than him assisting Justinian with the cost of building Hagia Sophia.
That's what you need to know.
Okay.
Yeah, he was heavily influential in the cost of the building of Hagia Sophia. But he also commissioned other works of art. We didn't really go over them. He commissioned a throne, and he traveled back and forth within the empire. For all for all reasonable purposes, he was the main man at Ravenna, because Justinian never went to Ravenna. It was always Bishop Maximianus.
So when we're talking about the Church of Ravenna, is there a name to that church, or is it just the Church of Ravenna? I don't remember well.
It's called the Church of San Vitale.
Oh, okay. San Vitale was in Ravenna.
It's in Ravenna. Yeah.
Oh, so San Vitale was the one that was based in Santa Costanza?
Yes.
Okay.
And you could make a case. Okay, so San Vitale was based on Santa Costanza. Hagia Sophia also was loosely based on Santa Costanza and the church at Ravenna. And if you really wanted to push it, you could make a case that the Dome of the Rock was also based on Santa Costanza, San Vitale, and Hagia Sophia.
Yeah, because there are elements, I think, of in the Dome of the Rock of the Byzantine constructors. What were those again? Like the.
Did I have a picture? Oh, I forgot to put my picture of Islam in here. I'll pull one up and we'll talk about it. The interior was one. The ceiling mosaics were very similar to San Vitale. The gilding, the gold gilding, and the dome.
Wasn't there something about the columns that they were they Corinthian columns? I
don't know. I'll have to pull it up, but I think you might be right.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned that we see here Corinthian columns that sort of like this Roman influence here.
Yeah. So what we do know, we call Santa Costanza, even though it's late antiquity, Ravenna, and Hagia Sophia, all Byzantine influenced, just like we call the Dome of the Rock. They were all done by Byzantine influence. So if I were to ask you who were the artists of Hagia Sophia, well, they had an actual architect, but who was the architect of San Vitale? It was just unknown Byzantine builder. We just happen to know they were Byzantine. Okay, let's see. Remember the difference between a pendentive and a squinch? Anybody remember?
Oh, the squinches. The pendentive is that part that supports the dome on top of the dome, sort of like. And the squinches, there are like 4 of them, but I don't know exactly what the difference would be. Like, what is the squinch doing that the pendentive isn't doing?
So this will make a lot of sense if you take out your textbook and look after we talk. But basically, this squinch is a system that's cubical. And the dome is placed on top of the cube. The pendentive is a system where 2 domes are round and stack on top of each other. So if you could picture an ice cream cone, if you get a double-decker ice cream cone, you get one scoop that goes on bottom and then one scoop that goes on top. The difference here with Hagia Sophia.
That would be the pendentive.
Right. So the difference with Hagia Sophia is the scoop that's on the bottom is fairly weighty and massive, and the scoop that goes on the top is smaller. So when they put the ice cream scoop on the cone, they level it off so that you can see through the dome at the top. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how that works. It's brand new technology that was designed specifically by the builders and designers of Hagia Sophia. They were mathematicians, they were geometrists, and they were very good at sort of looking at a geometric problem and creating a new solution visually for it.
Are we still considering the outside of churches lackluster at this point? Because
yes,
I mean, from a historical perspective, that would only change in the second golden age of Byzantine. But
Right.
looking here at Hagia Sophia, that doesn't seem exact. I wouldn't define it as lackluster, but yeah.
Compared to the well, I mean, I think you have to like sort of fast forward to Gothic if you want to talk about lackluster versus like decorative. There's just no decorative element on the outside. The colors are all very similar. They're all smooth. They don't really even have any like variation in the masonry. We get into the second golden age of Byzantine and you get some, they begin to start doing some masonry variation, which is important.
You said that for that dome on top and the light that Hagia Sophia uses is to emphasize the sort of ascension to heaven that
Yes.
the person there would experience.
Yes.
Hmm.
It's all about the light. It's all about the idea that Jesus ascended into heaven and they want your spirit to kind of like go into Hagia Sophia and feel ascended. So that's pretty much was pretty much the goal of Hagia Sophia. Okay, the second golden age of Byzantine brings us a few new things. Remember, in the early Christian / late antiquity and the first golden age, Jesus is not allowed to be shown hanging on the cross. Now, in the second golden age of Byzantine, there's been enough time between the establishment of Christianity and the killing of Jesus to the second golden age that they're now allowed to show Jesus hanging on the cross. So we get some interesting variations of what Jesus looks like. This particular image that you're looking at here is the mosaic that was in Hagia Sophia. It's a later mosaic. So remember, they built Hagia Sophia, but the artwork in Hagia Sophia is still being implemented until they lose control over it to the Turks. And so Jesus here is pictured in the imperial style in that Pantocrator image. So you get that one eye that's a little bit larger, has a little bit more pointy of an eyebrow with the smaller eye that's a little bit more kinder. This one side, the cheekbone's a little bit higher and wider. The other side's a little bit more gaunt.
So Pantocrator would be sort of that division in the face that you have one side sort of kinder and this other side sort of harsher.
Yeah, the one side's sort of mad and the other side's sort of kind.
Okay, so that would be the Pantocrator, because I was going to ask about what exactly Pantocrator was.
That is the definition of the Pantocrator. It's it's the image of Jesus where the two halves of the face don't match exactly. Mm-hmm. One has one expression, the other has another expression. He also holds the sign of benediction and a Bible in one hand. So typically, if you've got two sides of the face that aren't exactly the same, and you've got that benediction in the Bible, that's a Pantocrator.
And the red cheeks would be also imperial style, right?
Yes, I'm so happy you noticed that. Yes.
Yeah, because when we talked about imperial style on the other slides, I was thinking of large pupils and the thick eyebrows when we were looking at Justinian. But now that I looked at this one, I was like, oh, the red cheeks as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That variation in the face is very important in the imperial style. And we've been able to kind of trace it back from early antiquity into, or first golden age into second and third golden age of Byzantine. Mm-hmm. It all comes from sort of the shading in the face. And Justinian and Theodora's mosaics also follow that imperial style. We change from plain halos that are like disc-like in shape to ones that have these crosses behind them. This is the Greek cross. The Greek cross has has the nave and the transept crossing as being the same length. Is the difference. It's why Greek churches tend to be Byzantine in style. They tend to have a rounder look, whereas the Roman churches tend to be basilica in style. Now we go from Jesus being plebeian in late antiquity to being the patrician or the God of heaven. He has nice bright colored clothing. He looks wealthy. We see lots of imperial patterning. The mosaic is very detailed. You get a sense that the face turns in the light. And now images of Christ are more common on the cross. At the very end of the Second Golden Age of Byzantine, iconoclasm becomes rampant and we lose a lot of wooden icons. As far as architecture goes, we get more decorative building materials like the Catholicon. It has bricks that come from the area. There's a lot of variation in the color. There's even windows. And just remember, just like we've always been talking about, the Byzantine lands are heavily being threatened by the Ottomans. So right before we get to the Romanesque, the Christian Crusades happen to try to win back the lands that are lost to the Ottomans. Okay, questions about any of these slides before we move on to doing a little practice of compare and contrast?
One, hang on. Oh, the mandorla was that circle that was all around the figure of Christ, right?
Yeah. The mandorla. Let's see. Let me bring up an example of the mandorla. We see the mandorla in Romanesque art a lot too. This is a mandorla. It's that egg shape that Christ sits in the mosaics. I don't have one that's coming up that's, but you can see.
Is it originally like that sort of seed? Is that why the name comes from?
It's almond shaped. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah. It must, and mandorla in Latin must mean almond. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe in Italian, or I don't know, it looks Italian, but interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to Italy. I don't remember them talking about mandorlas when it was coming to nuts, but it seems like a logical explanation for how they keep popping up in the
that was funny.
Google search. Let me see. Mandorla in fresco.
I love how these still pop up.
I get a lot of them. Yeah. The one that's in my head. Is this one. We studied this one from the Church of Dormition, I believe.
I just wanted to interrupt you for a second. I solved the mystery. Almond in Italian is indeed mandorla. So that explains all the almonds we were getting.
Okay. Yeah, this one is from the monastery at St. Catherine's in Mount Sinai. So that's where the mandorla starts to appear. We're going to see it all through Romanesque. It's going to be like really, really a fixture of Romanesque art. So there's your mandorla. All right, as far as comparing the Forum of Trajan to the Basilica, let's look at that. So I would ask you to do it with this particular image here. And we would be comparing it to, see if maybe I can find a church that's already there. Oh, that's how we'll do it. We'll open another tab. Okay, so then if you were going to compare it to the Church of Dormition in Delphi, Greece. So what you'd really be doing would be comparing the footprint, not necessarily comparing the Church of Dormition as a basilica style church. So that won't work.
And by the footprint, you mean the how in the the marble of the Forum of Trajan was sort of like reflective, was it?
What I mean is the floor plan. So you would be looking at here, something like this. I would be giving you a diagram that looks at the floor plan. So if you were comparing the two, this one to this one, copy image, go here. Let me paste it. But if you were comparing, you would want to look at the footprint and see, okay, here you've got this area here, that's the Forum. You've got the Basilica here. And then you've got a temple behind it. I wonder if I can launch another browser.
Are we comparing it in terms of like, oh, there's a nave here, then there isn't one here, and there is like coffers, and like there aren't coffers or things like that, or
exactly. That's exactly what I want you to do.
Okay.
I
think both of them have coffers, don't they?
The Basilica Olpia, I don't know if it has coffers or not. Remember, coffers are those recessed areas in the ceiling of the church that help to make the dome lighter.
You mentioned there are coffers in
Did I?
The Trajan.
Oh, come on, there we go. So here you have here you've got the floor plan, and you can see how similar the floor plan of the Forum of Trajan is to, say, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So you've got the nave. I don't see a courtyard. This wouldn't be one I'd use. Let's try. You can do it with just about any building that has Roman influence. So like, let's look at the Great Mosque at Kairouan. If you look at the Great Mosque at Kairouan compared to the Forum of Trajan, you can see how very similar they are. They both have courtyards. They both have this entrance area, which we call the narthex. They both have side aisles or colonnades leading into the church.
Is there something resembling a nave in the forum or no?
In the forum, when you get into the basilica, the nave, this is a picture of the interior. The nave is this aisle that runs straight down the center of the church.
So, I think that's the one you mentioned, that there are coffers there.
Oh yeah, there are coffers. See the coffers there? It also has a clerestory.
So we see the similarities would be the nave. You mentioned the narthex. Yeah, narthex. And the aisles.
The side aisles. Yep.
Side aisles, yes. Do we see any other elements that are similar? Or would be like, or would transept, atrium, and what is it? Apse?
Apse. Okay, so the okay, hang on. I'm gonna grab my book. Okay, so if you look at the Church of Santa Sabina in Rome, and you compare it to the Forum of Trajan, it's a direct copy almost. You've got a nave, you've got side aisles, just like now. The Forum of Trajan has double side aisles. Santa Sabina has single side aisles, but they're still side aisles nonetheless. They both have colonnades with Corinthian columns. They both have clerestories. There's the clerestory of Forum of Trajan.
I think when in the lecture, when you show us Santa Sabina, you mentioned that there's a three-something nave.
Three-part nave elevation, probably, is what I'm telling you.
Yeah. I was to ask what a three-part elevation nave means.
Yeah, okay, so that means you've got this first elevation, which is the side aisle. You've got this triforium area, which is this blank wall in between the side aisle and the clerestory. So we call that a three-part nave elevation. You'll understand that better when we get into Gothic, because we're looking at tons and tons of churches.
And would we have any nave elevations in the Forum of Trajan, or?
No, well, I mean, yeah, it's a two-part nave. You could call it a three-part nave elevation because it's got the same thing. It's got the columns. You got the space.
Yeah, I thought it could be like a two-part one. That was my immediate impression, but I wanted to ask you what it was actually.
Yeah, and then if you look at Santa Sabina, it's got coffers, coffers. The apse at Santa Sabina is here at the very end. I don't see that the Forum of Trajan has one like it.
Okay.
So yeah, basically the Forum of Trajan is the blueprint for the Basilica Church. And even if you compare St. Peter's to the Forum of Trajan, you're still going to get a direct comparison of the Forum of Trajan establishing that style. You can even see it in the Roman mosques. In the Roman mosques that are Roman influenced, you can see the similar characteristics.
So the only things that would be lacking would be the apse and transepts, or are there transepts?
No transepts in the Forum of Trajan.
Okay.
The transept is based on the Roman Cross Church. Okay, so here is the transept. It's that arm that comes across. Here's the nave, and then the dome usually sets right in the area where the nave and the transept cross. We call that the transept crossing. Even in
would groin vaults be used for transept crossings or no?
No. Groin vaulting is 2 barrel vaults that cross at a 90-degree angle. I'll show you that in a minute. But you see here at the Tumma Gallipocidum, the arms cross, and at the crossing of the arms, you get the dome.
Yeah, the crossing would be the transepts.
Yep.
So where is groin vaulting used?
Groin vaulting.
I think that would be Roman Empire, probably.
It is. I was going to try to see if I could find an interior building where I could show it to you better. So the Romans invent the barrel vault, right? That's this thing that looks like a tunnel. And then they go, what if I intersect the vaults? You get this groin vault when you intersect them at a 90-degree angle. Then in a church, it has a decorative element. Where they cross. Because if you look at the ceiling, you get this pretty X from below. See that? All it is a 90-degree intersection of the barrel vault. But it has this nice, beautiful decorative element when you're inside the church. And it starts in the Byzantine era, but we'll see that groin vault become more and more spectacular throughout the Byzantine eras and into the Gothic. At the end of the Gothic, the vaulting is just breathtaking. Any other questions about vaulting?
No, just that.
Okay, Aiden, you've been silent most of this. Do you have any questions? Is there anything I can clarify for you?
No, I'm good. I'm just absorbing the info, you feel me?
Okay, good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the
good review.
That's the end of my review. Questions about the test? You want to ask me?
So it's in. I gotta take the 2 separate parts, correct? I can take those whenever, as long as I get them before that due date at Sunday.
Exactly. So that means that you don't like okay, before when you had to do the whole test at the exact same time, now you can separate it into two parts. Like you can do the multiple choice one day, like maybe you want to do the multiple choice on Saturday and then give yourself a break and then do the essay part on Sunday. Like you don't have to do it all at once.
Cool.
But you have to do each section in one sitting. So if you start the multiple choice, you have to finish the multiple choice.
All right.
Same with the essay. Like once you start it, you gotta finish it. Yeah. Okay, well, that's office hours for today.
We're actually going to do Islamic as well.
Oh, you know, I don't know why I didn't add Islamic in there. Let's see, I can go over Islamic. Let me see. Let's do the Dome of the Rock.
Are there is most of the focus of the test on the other eras?
Yeah, because we did more art in, like, unfortunately, Islam is such a short unit in our book, which makes me very, very sad because obviously I think it's super important with my background in African art. However, it is sort of what it is. So this is the Dome of the Rock. Remember, in Islamic art, we get a few rules that we have to follow. Number one is that it's strictly forbidden to have images of people in the church or in the mosque. Anything that's religious cannot have a figure or a person related to it. The interior of the Dome of the Rock. Okay. I don't know why I did that. I want to show you the ceiling. So if you look at the ceiling of the Dome of the Rock, here it is. You can see that influence of San Vitale with the repeating pattern in the mosaics and the influence of Hagia Sophia with that row of windows at the base of the dome.
Would most of the constructions we've seen be using pendatives and not squinches? Or...
No, the Dome of the Rock would be considered a squinch.
Okay.
Yeah, because the base of the building is not a dome itself. So that's kind of how you have to look at it. The pendentive, the base of the building has to be circular and dome-like.
Okay.
The squinch is a square. So anytime you got these like nice hard corners, you got a squinch instead of
in Hagia Sophia, would we also have a squinch, or would that be a pendentive?
Hagia Sophia is a pendentive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does Hagia Sophia have sort of, what's the difference of the externally?
Okay. Hagia Sophia is a little bit more difficult because I can't get like close up to the building, but if you can see, the building is all rounded. Like all of the corners and everything are round. Like the only parts that are square aren't actually part of the body of the building. These things here project from the building. In the interior, the squinch is, or the pendentive, is this area at the base of the dome that dips down like this. So if you look at the Dome of the Rock, you don't have those.
Yeah, okay, so that's an indicator.
Yeah, see, at the Dome of the Rock, you just get this straight cylinder that goes straight down. Yeah.
This is not related to this segment, but was it Vespasian?
Vespasian.
Yeah, Vespasian. what exactly are the contributions or relevance that we would need to know concerning him?
He didn't really do that much, but there was lots of uprisings under his rule, and I believe he took over after the line of the Flavians. And
so he's after the Flavians, not before.
I think so. I'd have to look it up. Let me see. The Roman Empire's line of lineage is so crazy that it's hard for me to keep it straight. Let's see what we know about this space. He's the one that founds the Flavian dynasty. So he was right before the Flavians.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yep. He's sort of the father of the Flavian.
Okay, so when you're asking us to identify Vespasian and his relevance, we're basically talking about the Flavians and Colosseum, new standards of beauty with diamond-shaped face, curly hair, blonde neck, Livia.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's sort of where we're going towards. And about Mark Antony and Cleopatra, all we need to know would be that their defeat was like sort of the starter of the Roman Empire in the period of Romana. Okay.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You've done your homework.
Yeah. I took while I was watching the lectures throughout the weeks, I started taking notes on everything I thought was relevant. It ended up being, I think, 6 or 8 pages.
Yeah, I still have all my notes from art history 1 and 2, and they there's a lot.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, well, is this details is something that I will need to know specifically. So I'll just go for everything and see if it's not necessary, then it's fine. It's better than I'm missing something.
It is a lot of details. It's a lot of information. So just know that if you generally know Vespasian was the father of the Flavians, you're good.
Okay.
But I mean, if you're talking about Hadrian, you need to know that he built the Pantheon. Right.
Okay, but yeah, I mean that's I think that's the main thing about Hadrian. So
right.
If you're thinking about Hadrian, you know about the construction of the Pantheon. Was it a homage is it Roman gods or
dedicated to all of the Roman gods? Yeah,
all of the Roman gods, and it had that I forgot the name. Was it the circle, the little
oculus?
What?
It had the oculus.
The oculus.
Opening.
Yep. Yeah. So those
oculus.
are the main things I point out about Hadrian, I think.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I think you've got it. And you seem to be waiting for the information. I know it's like a large sea of info, but
oh yeah, especially because the Roman Republican Empire one was a pretty extensive. You had a lot of information in sort of a limited amount of time. I just wanted to make sure I have everything sort of understood for taking the exam, because I probably want to take it either today or tomorrow. So
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Roman it kills me that we do the Roman Empire in 1 week, but for the sake of organization, you have to organize it somehow. So that's how we do it. It's just a lot of the Roman Empire is tons. I mean, it's such a large span of years too. So it's complicated. Okay, well, I think that's us for today. If you get to doing something and realize that you need some more clarification, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call me. And I wish you happy studying.
Thank you. I hope I don't get too nitpicky about the questions that I don't get right.
That's okay. That's how you learn.
Yeah. So probably I'll see you next Wednesday to dissect them.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week, Ricardo.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye, Aiden.
Bye. Wait, I just have one more question.
Sure.
I was looking at the homework from the Islamic art, and my question is, before Rome fell, it was like I'm kind of confused. Like, so the Russians took over before the Roman Empire fell, correct? Like Constantinople, he was the last like superpower, but then like the Romans took over, and then finally the empire fell, correct?
Well,
I mean the Russians.
Russia holds out till the very end. Like they're the last dying ember of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were basically colonized by the Vikings and the Germanic tribes. So they hold on to their very last dying breath. And then like up until the 1500s, and then the Vikings completely take over. So they really don't have any, like when we think of timelines, when we think of this happens, then this happens, then this happens, you have to remember when the Roman Empire fell, it fell in stages, and other things begin to happen going like coincide each other. It's not it's not as
it all
linear.
came crashing down.
Yeah, it's not as linear as we want to think. So the Ottomans took over North Africa long before Russia fell.
Of Carthage and stuff.
Yeah.
I hear.
Yeah, I hope that clears that up.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. It's like I said, the Roman Empire is messy and confusing. So we try to make it as simple as it can be, but it's just not.
And the last question is for Roman Empire. When I was doing the Roman homework, I'm not sure if I missed it, but on the homework there's questions about Roman officers and like their police.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up 1 second.
They're called condottiers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the condottiers have quite a bit of power. And the reason they have quite a bit of power is because, remember, one of Rome's challenges is that they've got too much land and not enough ability to communicate quickly. It's not like today where we have the internet or the telephone or whatever. In order to get a message, the only way to they don't even have a mail system. In order to get a message, they have to send a rider with a horse all the way to wherever it is. And so because of that, the local officials had a lot more power than you would think.
Because they're able to because the ruling officials, they're like just in one spot. It's hard to get their power across the whole empire.
Yeah, they're the ones they're actually, if you ask me, the ones that have the most power, even though you've got an emperor. The emperor just says, hey, this is what we're going to do. The condottiers are the ones who actually like follow through and push through being the sort of implementation of the law. So if you get a group of condottiers that don't agree with the law and they don't do it, I mean, they'll lose their head eventually because it'll get back to the Roman emperor, but it'll be a while before they have much change based on the fact that the condottiere didn't agree. So you get, that is sort of the stem of where the power grid sort of crumbles when it comes to the Roman Empire, because you've got, in order to get everybody to do the same thing, the emperor has to have a lot of social control.
That's true, yeah.
Social control comes from physical intimidation. It comes from emotional intimidation. It comes from show of power through art.
Like the, what's it called? Propaganda.
Yeah, like that propaganda art. So it's one of those things where it's like, they just can't have enough people in high places because of the amount of land they have. And because of that, the local officials have quite a bit of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, yeah, that clarifies all my questions.
Okay. Well, good luck to you. If you need something throughout your test taking weekend, let me know. If not, happy test taking.
All right, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.